In 1915, tipping was a crime in 6 American states. Not tacky, illegal. Washington, Mississippi, Arkansas, Tennessee, Iowa, and South Carolina all passed laws to stamp it out. And they weren't alone. There was an actual organization called the Anti-Tipping Society of America, and tens of thousands of people signed its pledge, swearing not to tip for an entire year. Their argument wasn't stinginess, it was democracy. Americans had seen tipping in Europe, where a servant bowed for a coin from an aristocrat, into a country that insisted it had no aristocracy. That handoff of cash felt like importing a class system through the back door. One writer of the era called it the training of a servile class. Every one of those 6 laws was repealed within about a decade. Something beat them. Now watch a screen swivel around at a coffee counter and ask you for 25% before it's handed you anything. Easy. Breathe. Watch this. Because what beat those laws wasn't manners, and it wasn't generosity. It was 3 specific decisions made by people with names, and I'm going to draw all 3. The first one happened on a train. After the Civil War, the Pullman Company became one of the largest employers of black men in America. Their job was the sleeping car, making the beds, shining the shoes, carrying the bags, being awake while the country slept. And the passengers had a habit. They didn't ask the porter's name. They called him George. All of them. Every porter on every train was George, after George Pullman, the man who owned the company. It came from an older custom, the one where enslaved people were called by their owner's name. Now here's where it gets strange. In 1914, a lumber baron named George Delaney decided this was funny and founded the Society for the Prevention of Calling Sleeping Car Porters. George membership had exactly one requirement. Your name had to be George. It grew to more than 31,000 members. Babe Ruth joined. His first name was George. The King of England joined. King George V of the British Empire was a card-carrying member of a club about railway nicknames. And in 1926, this Club of George actually won something. They got the Pullman Company to install a small rack in each car with a card showing the porter's real name. Sit with the whole picture. It took a joke society with a king in it 12 years to get a man's name displayed on the wall of the train he worked on. Because a man with no name is easy to not pay. Pullman's arrangement was simple. The company paid the porter a wage that didn't cover a life, and the porter made up the difference from the passengers' pockets. The wage wasn't deleted. It was handed off to the customer. And so was the decision. What you earn stops being a number in a contract and becomes a mood in a stranger. That's gear 1, and it is the whole trick in its earliest and most naked form. The Anti-Tipping Society lost because the handoff was simply too cheap to give up. The second decision happened in a room in Washington in 1996. Here's a fact almost nobody knows. From 1950 all the way to 1991, the wage for tip workers rose every single time the federal minimum wage rose. They were bolted together. When one moved, the other moved. Then came the 1996 fight over raising the minimum wage. On one side, Congress. On the other, the National Restaurant Association. And its head at the time was a man named Herman Cain, who years later would run for President of the United States. The association made an offer, and it was elegant. We won't fight your minimum wage increase. Pass it. Just unbolt the 2 numbers first. They passed it. The wages were decoupled, and the tipped wage was set at a flat $2.13 an hour. That was 1996. That number has not moved since. Every price in your life has been recut a dozen times since then. Rent, gas, insurance, a cup of coffee. That one wage floor has sat perfectly still for 3 decades, because in one negotiation it stopped being attached to anything that moves. Some states are far more generous and require the full minimum before tips. But at the federal level, in much of the country, the employer's share of that person's income is $2.13, and you are the rest. That's gear 2, a handshake in 1996 that quietly turned your tip from a bonus into a payroll line. The third decision happened in a glass-blowing studio. Around 2009, a man named Jim McKelvey was selling glass faucets, and he lost a $2,000 sale because he had no way to take a credit card. He complained about it to his friend Jack Dorsey. Together, they built a little white square that plugged into a phone so that any small seller, a florist, a food truck, a guy blowing glass, could take a card like a real store. It was genuinely a tool of liberation for tiny businesses. And then it grew up, and the reader became a tablet, and the tablet learned to spin. Watch what that spin actually did. Before it, you tipped where a person served you a meal. You did the math yourself, in your head, out of your own wallet, in private. After it, three things changed at once. The ask became a default. You are no longer starting at zero and deciding to be generous. You're starting at a number someone else configured and choosing to go below it. Behavioral researchers call that an anchor. The ask became witnessed. The screen turns while the worker stands right there and someone waits behind you. A private calculation became a small public performance, and the pause before you tap is the loudest part of it. And the ask escaped the restaurant. The prompt now appears where you poured your own coffee, at the self-checkout where a machine served you, at the airport kiosk. Surveys through 2023 and 2024 kept finding the same thing. Most Americans say they are asked to tip in more places than 5 years ago, and a large share resent it. The industry even coined a word for it, tipflation, and the numbers on those buttons are a setting. Someone chooses 18, 20, 25. Someone chooses whether no tip sits in gray at the bottom or doesn't appear at all. The old standard was 15%, calculated on a bill you read. Today, the lowest button often starts where the old standard ended, on a total that already includes tax. Nobody announced a raise. The starting line just moved. Turn the canvas. You thought this was a manners problem. People got greedy. Customers got cheap. Everyone's annoyed at the register. Look at the drawing again. A company in the 1800s discovered it could hand a wage to the customer along with the decision. A negotiation in 1996 unbolted that wage from every other wage in the country and left it at $2.13. And a small white card reader, built to help a glassblower, grew into a screen that asked for the handoff at every transaction in the economy. Nobody's manners changed. A payroll was reassigned, frozen, and then automated. It has a name, the wage handoff. The tip was never the extra. In America, the tip became the wage, and the guilt is just the interface. Now, the honest part, because this machine loves a villain, and I'm not giving you one. The person holding that screen didn't set the percentages, doesn't own the tablet, and may genuinely be living on $2.13 plus whatever you decide. The cafe owner isn't the villain either. They're competing with a place down the street that keeps menu prices low precisely because tips fill the gap. Jim McKelvey was trying to sell glass faucets. Even the George meant well. Every piece is defensible, and that is exactly why the machine is invisible. There's no mustache to point at. Just 150 years of incentives leaning the same direction, away from the payroll and toward you. So here's the one look to take with you. It costs nothing and takes 2 seconds. Next time the screen spins, before you feel anything, ask one question. Is this a wage or is this a bonus? Sitting down, served by someone earning the federal tipped wage? That's a wage. Tip like it's payroll, because legally it is. Standing at a counter where the worker already earns the full minimum after you carried your own cup, that's a bonus. Giving it is a kindness. Just know that's what you're doing, because the machine runs on making those two feel identical on the same screen. Tell them apart and the guilt stops making the decision. That flinch you feel when the tablet turns around was never about being cheap. It was about being handed a bill that someone else was supposed to pay. See the machine. Don't be the fuel. We draw one machine a week. The next one is already on the board.